Retirement is a period of our life that we all hope to reach. Some will get there sooner than others, of course. But today on the Canadian Expat, we ask, what are some of the easiest places for Canadians to retire to abroad? It's not uncommon for us to get questions about countries that we would consider great place to retire to. As you can imagine, this is a very difficult question to respond to, as the definition of a great country to retire to is highly subjective. If you think heat and beaches are great, perhaps a country in the south would be good for you. Or perhaps you would rather be in a country with a culture a bit more familiar. That might be a big factor. Of course, costs, availability of healthcare, language, culture, temperature, humidity, access to Canada. These are just some of the factors that should be considered. For the purpose of this video, we are highlighting 5 regions in the world that are generally considered easy places for Canadians to spend retirement. We rated each country in terms of cost of living, quality of healthcare, accessibility from Canada, the climate, how easy it would be to get by linguistically, and the presence of a community of expats, which is an important factor for retirement. It's really important for me to emphasize here that the idea is to rate places for retirement when the appetite is not so much to experience a different culture, but rather ease into that next stage of life. Regardless, we would love to hear what you think about the regions we discuss. Do you agree with our ratings? Disagree? Do you have another country that you think should be on the list? Add your comments below. So, let's get into it. Eastern Europe. More specifically, former communist countries are super cheap with a certain cultural familiarity. You can ski in the winter. Vehicles are inexpensive. And the food is amazing. Accessibility might be a bit harder, but once you're there, travel throughout the rest of Europe is inexpensive. Culture, of course, is a big bonus. So, cheap rent, food, and general living expenses gives most of the countries within Eastern Europe a solid 7. Healthcare, for the most part, is fairly strong and is certainly growing stronger all the time. We gave this region a 7. Accessibility might be the Achilles heel here, as there are only a few direct flights from Canada. We gave the country a 4 for accessibility. The climate is so varied depending on where you are. We gave this a 7 as well. The region is not necessarily an escape from the snow, but with 4 seasons, it can be really beautiful, and cheap access to warmer areas in Europe gives you lots of choices. We gave the region a 7 for language. The thought was that while English or French might not be super strong in some regions, the fact is that many Canadians might have an affinity for Eastern Europe and may in fact already have connections here with some linguistic skills already built in. So there's definitely not a large contingent of Canadians or other expats for that matter, so scored really low in community as well with a 5. Eastern Europe came in 5th with a score of 37. Ecuador. International Living, that's the magazine for living abroad, has rated Ecuador at or near the top of their list of best countries to retire to for quite some time. It's a very popular country. Your Canadian dollar goes a long way, and obtaining a visa to retire here is not very complicated. It has a variety of beaches, tree towns in the highlands, and big cities with plenty of culture. Ecuador is fairly inexpensive, so we gave it an 8. Healthcare is not bad, but you can find it a little bit touch and go in some of the areas, so got a 6. The country can be a bit interesting to get to, so gets a 6 for accessibility. The weather is warm, but not unbearable if you're in the highlands, so gets an 8 for climate. Language can be tough in the countryside, so scores a little bit lower at 6, but there is a growing expat group, so gets a 7 for community. Ecuador overall gets a 41 and comes in 4th place. Colombia. Colombia had gained a bit of a bad rap through the 80s and the 90s, but things have changed significantly since. There are a variety of comfortable big countries like Medellin, which maintains great level temperatures year-round. Rent is very reasonable in many of the beautiful cities and towns in the country. Visas are easy to get as long as you have a retirement income of about $800 US. Colombia is very reasonable for food and rent, so scores a high 8. Healthcare is improving all the time, so gets a 7. It does take a long time to get to from anywhere in Canada, so scores low on the accessibility rating with 5. Colombia reports very comfortable for weather with options to move to different climatic regions in the country, so gets an 8 for climate. Language can be an issue in some areas, so scored relatively low with a 6, and although there is a growing expat population, it is still fairly small, so scored a 6. Colombia came in 3rd overall with a total of 40. Thailand. If you're looking towards Asia to retire, you could do much worse than Thailand. The food scene is great, and if you really want to live near a beach, there are plenty of choices. You can expect living costs to be about half of what you would find in Canada, with weather very warm and quite humid. Although not as inexpensive as some countries in the region, Thailand is still relatively inexpensive, so gets an 8. Healthcare is a little rough around the edges, and if you live in a bit of a remote area, it can be limited. So we gave the country a 6. Relative ease of access from some cities in Canada, because Thailand is 7. The weather here is warm and humid without a whole lot of variety, so it gets a 7. Language is okay in the cities or where there's loads of tourists, so it gets a 7. There's a growing international expat community and gets a 7 for that as well. This brings Thailand to a total of 42 and puts the country in 2nd place. Mexico. Mexico, for the most part, is accessible from every major city in Canada, so it gets great points there. The ocean side can be extremely warm, but the country is exceptionally varied in climate. There are many retired Canadians in Mexico, in fact, more than any other country. Some areas are full of snowbirds. Healthcare, depending on the region, can be quite reliable, and with a large number of Canadians waving the maple leaf, you could feel quite at home. So for costs, we gave Mexico a 6, as it isn't the cheapest country to move to. Healthcare, an 8, one of the best in the regions, were covered here. With all of the different flights available to Mexico, we gave it a 9 for accessibility from Canada. With the options for a varied climate depending on the region of Mexico, we gave it a 9. As English is fairly well understood, we gave it an 8 for language. And having a good-sized Canadian population, we gave community an 8. This brings the score to 48 and makes Mexico the leader in our ratings. Again, we'd love to hear what you think. Do you live in any of these regions? Thinking about moving? Do you disagree with any of our points? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. If we get enough comments, we may need to do a follow-up video, and by subscribing and hitting the bell button, you'll get notification when new videos get published. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter. The link is in the description below. Until next time.